Hi everyone, welcome back to Richmond Public Library Presents Young Writers Workshop. I'm Mr. Lewis from the Ginter Park Library. Today we're going to be talking about writing style, how you write your stories, the way you form your sentences, what makes your writing special and unique to you. We're going to be covering four major points, but there are a lot more that goes into your writing style. There are literally whole books written about this, but we're going to cover the four most basic. And the first is the point of view for your story. And this is how your story is being told to the reader. Who is telling your story? Is it one of the characters in the story? Is it the main character? Is it a side character? Who is the one giving the information to the reader? Next is your audience. Who are you writing for? You have a target audience, an intended audience, and who those people are will determine how you write your story. Next is mood and tone, and these are all about the feelings that are expressed by you, the author, and received by the reader. And last is syntax. This is all about the way you write your sentences, sentence structure, the way you put your words together that make you and your writing unique. So first, we're going to talk about point of view. As I said, this is the way your story is being told to the audience or the reader. And there are four basic kinds of points of view. The first is first person. And this basically boils down to, you know what I know. So you, the reader, know what I, the character, the main character, and the narrator of the story know. In this point of view, the narrator, the person telling the story, is one of the characters in the story, and we are seeing the story unfold basically through their eyes. So any thoughts that they have, we would know as the reader, we would know their thoughts, but we won't know anyone else's thoughts. We are limited to what this character sees and what this character knows. This has pros and cons depending on how you want your story to be told. Some authors can use first person perspective to extremely powerful effect because you get to know the character much more than any of the other points of view. You are literally stepping in the shoes of the person telling the story. You are much more involved in the story in this way. It's like you, the reader, are a part of the story now. But it has some flaws because you are not aware of everything that's going on in the story because you are limited to only what this one character knows. You also have bias because the character is telling the story from their perspective. So odds are you will like the characters that this character likes. You will be happy or sad or angry depending on how this character reacts to a given situation. So you are heavily influenced by the character telling the story. Now, this could be good or bad depending on how you want your story to be told. It's just how you use it. Next up is third person limited. And this boils down to you know what they know. This is very similar to first person in that generally you are following one, maybe two or three characters total, and you're seeing it from their perspective, but you're not seeing it directly behind their eyes. You might have an idea of what they're thinking or how they are reacting to things, but mostly you are just almost watching it from like behind their shoulder. If you play video games, it's that third person perspective where the character that you're playing is right in front of you. So you're not seeing it from the first person point of view like you would with a lot of action games. But some of the role playing games where you are behind the character, that's what this is. Third person limited. You're seeing it from an outside, but focused through a specific character or characters if you switch viewpoints. Next up is third person omniscient. Omniscient means all knowing. And this basically means you know everything. Third person omniscient point of view basically means that you, the reader, can be told anything. You might hear the thoughts of multiple characters in a scene. You might have asides that kind of point out something that is happening in a completely different scene that you are not witnessing, but you are being told by the author, just so you have that information. If you want, you can think of, to continue the analogy of video games, third person omniscient would be like a top down real time strategy, in that you can see the entire map. You're not focusing on one part. You can focus on one specific location, and you usually do, but you can also zoom back out and look somewhere else. So third person omniscient also has pros and cons, just like all of the rest of these. And some of them are, it's less personable. You might not be focusing on the characters as much, so there's more focus on the world and the setting as opposed to the characters and their actions. And sometimes you can give too much information away. But also, there are times where third person omniscient is the only way to get some information to the reader. Because if a reader needs to know something that the character that you're following in first person or third person limited, if that character does not and probably never will know this, then the only way to get that information to the reader is through third person omniscient point of view. I hope that makes sense. Now, there is technically a fourth point of view, and that is second person. And I like to call this just you know. This is an odd point of view, and it's very rarely used. I have seen it used, and it can be used well, but it's very difficult to do. Second person point of view means that the description and actions are told as if you, the reader, are the person doing the actions. So it would be like you would write, you went to the store, or you woke up one day and this happened. You are the person doing the action. You, the reader, are the person doing the action. It's very difficult to write because it's jarring. Most people are not familiar with it because most people write in first person or one of the third person points of view. Second person is very difficult to write in. I'm not saying don't try it. If it's something that you think you can do, go for it. Absolutely. Experimentation is one of the key parts of writing. Trying out new things, seeing what works. If you think it'll work for you, go for it. But it is difficult. So I'm warning you now, it is difficult. But if you think you can do it, go for it. Absolutely. It is not the preferred method for a lot of authors, and it's not the preferred method for a lot of readers. I personally don't enjoy it because I find that it actually tends to take me out of the story rather than put me into the story. Even though I'm meant as the reader to be the character in the story, it tends to take me out of the story itself because it feels like the author is forcing me to do an action that I would not necessarily do. But there is one situation where it can work. If you've ever read the Choose Your Own Adventure stories, that actually uses second person quite often to very good effect because it is meant and designed for you, the reader, to be the one making choices. I wouldn't say it's a unique format, but it is certainly recognizable as being specific to Choose Your Own Adventure. So if you want something like that, that would work absolutely fine. But other than that, if you're not writing a Choose Your Own Adventure story, it is a lot harder to get the reader as involved as you would think, considering what the point of view actually is. So next I want to talk about audience. And the audience is the people who you are writing for. Whenever you're writing, you're always writing for somebody. That could be yourself, or it could be your friends, or it could be a general population. It is the people you are writing for. But one thing to keep in mind is that your intended audience is not always your actual audience. There are going to be plenty of people who read your stories who are not specifically who you intended to read your stories. And that's generally a good thing, but it is something to keep in mind when you are writing. An example of this would be, say, the Harry Potter series is written for children. It's a children's series. It's middle grade generally, with some YA towards the last couple of books, but generally it is a children's story. But think about how many adults love Harry Potter, and not just because a lot of them grew up with it, but they genuinely enjoy the story. So even though it was written for children, their intended audience was children, there are plenty of adults who enjoy it just as much. So next, we have to think about how our audience affects how we write. Who you think will read your work determines how much information you give and what kind of vocabulary you use. A story for your friends would be very different than a story for your teacher or a story for a younger child. If you're writing for a younger child, you will use simpler words. You might explain things a bit more than you normally would. If you're writing for your teacher, you might reference something that happened in class, something that the teacher would be familiar with, but something that anyone who is not in that class might not necessarily understand. If you're writing for your friends, same thing. You might reference things that your friends would understand, but people who are outside of that social circle might not understand. So as you're writing, keep that in mind, that you are going to be using words and phrases and references that might make perfect sense to you, but might not make perfect sense to somebody else. If you were writing a story that takes place on the 4th of July, for example, then you might know what the 4th of July is, what it's all about, how we celebrate, things like that, but somebody who does not live in America might not understand the concept behind it. They might understand that it is a holiday, that it's Independence Day, that we have fireworks, but they might not know more than that. So maybe you might need to take a little time to better explain the concept of the 4th of July. That's just an example. So as you're writing, keep this in mind. For the words you choose, how complicated, how simple they are, and the kind of references you use. Maybe it's the slang, maybe it's referring to a situation or an event that has happened that you are familiar with. Be aware, not everyone might be familiar with that event or story. So next we come to tone and mood, which are very similar, but it's important to keep them separate because it's very easy to confuse the two, but they are not the same. But they do both have to do with emotions. So let's start with tone. Tone is the attitude that the narrator is trying to convey to the reader. You're trying to show what the person speaking, how they feel about a situation through the words. Again, this is an example of show, don't tell, in that you don't want the narrator to say, I don't like that. You could show how they don't like that, or show that they don't like it by using words that express how they don't like that, if that makes sense. And this shows how the author feels about the topic. So often tone reflects the author. So if you like something in particular, then the way you talk about it, the way you write about it, will show how you like it, or just that you like it. Okay? So if a character is talking, the way they talk will show whether they like something or don't like something, whether they're surprised, confused, angry, happy, tired. Whatever it is, the tone is how the person speaking feels. The mood is the emotions that you want your reader to feel. Okay? So it's similar to atmosphere. It's the situation. It is the feeling that the reader gets from your story. Now, often tone and mood are linked. If the character or the narrator is trying to show a certain emotion, they want the reader to feel that emotion too, but not always. You can have a serious story, but still have characters or situations where there's comedy or tragedy or even horror, but the overall mood might still be the same. I hope that makes sense. So both mood and tone are developed in several ways. First is through focus, what you are focusing on. Okay? If you were trying to describe what the weather is like, if you focus on how cloudy it is, that's something maybe you're ignoring other aspects of it. Maybe it's super windy, but you're focusing more on how overcast it is. Okay? If you're focusing on the temperature, but don't really care about how sunny or cloudy it is, that's another aspect of it. This is a very general example, but the idea is that what you choose to focus on will help decide what the tone and the mood of your story, or at least of a scene in your story, will be. If you focus on one thing over another, that will help show the emotion that you're trying to get across. Next is through vocabulary, the words that you choose to use. Now, if you have gone on to the web page for this this workshop that I have here, then you'll see I actually have a little article about word choice. And it's important to understand that we have in the English language many different words for the same thing. The example I believe I used is run. Run is very simple. If you say run, you know exactly what you mean. But there are other words that convey the same motion, but a different emotion. So if I say dash, you're going fast, you're in a hurry. Okay? If I say jog, that's, a more leisurely, casual pace. If I say sprint, you are energetic, you are in a hurry, you are getting there as fast as you can. They all mean the same thing. You're moving quickly from one place to another. But they have different emotions. So think about that as you're writing. Choose words that help convey the emotion that you want, that set the mood and show the tone. And next is through omission. Omission means ignoring something, leaving something out, not talking about things. So by ignoring certain aspects of a situation or of a setting or of an event, you help convey the tone and the mood because you're focusing. Again, this goes back to focus. You're focusing on one thing over another. You are omitting, you are ignoring one aspect of it in order to build up the other emotion. Okay, so if I say, going back to the weather example, if I say it is very cloudy out, but then I don't mention how windy it is, you would get a different situation. You get a different feeling than if I said it's very windy and cloudy out. If I say it's windy and cloudy, you might get the feeling that it's stormy. Maybe it's not raining, but you have that sense of energy that you get when it's windy and cloudy. You can feel almost like there might be a storm coming on. Whereas if I just say it's cloudy, well, it's just a little overcast. It's, maybe still a nice day regardless. So what you choose to talk about, what you choose to focus on, what you choose to ignore, and the words you use to describe it will both show your attitude towards the topic to the reader, and it will help make the reader feel the emotion that you want them to feel. So last, we're going to talk about syntax. Now, syntax is the way you write your sentences. Okay, it's the actual words that you are putting on your page. And this includes your word choice. We already talked a bit about this a little bit. It's choosing one word over another that may have similar meanings, but give different feelings. So what words you choose are a part of your style. Your sentence length. Sometimes sentences can be long and rambling and go on, and sometimes that can be very good because it gives more detailed descriptions, because it really helps the reader understand more of what's going on, but it can sometimes be a little bit long and dull. Or you can have really short sentences which get right to the point, where don't meander or wander around at all, and it's just done. Which one you choose depends on you. Emphasis. What you choose to focus on. We talked a little bit about focus already, but focusing on one thing over another, emphasizing one thing, drawing attention to a certain thing while drawing attention away from something else. That is absolutely part of your style. What you choose to focus on matters. Some authors, when they're describing characters, will focus on physical appearance. Some authors will focus on characteristics. We talked about that in the previous video. So what you choose to focus on, what you choose to emphasize, is part of your style. And next is pauses. Pauses are breaks. They are where you slow things down. You can do this with periods, with commas, with kind of like skipping sentences, skipping sections, or just having pauses in the narrative where things that are actually happening slow down. But we're talking about syntax here, so the actual pauses in your sentences, where you put your periods, where you put your commas, and how often you do so. This kind of goes hand in hand with sentence length, where you decide where the reader stops before continuing. And pauses can be used to great effect if you do it properly. But be aware that if you have too many pauses, it can take the reader out of the story because there's no flow, there's no natural rhythm to the story because you're constantly starting and stopping. So now that we know what style is and the pieces that make up a writing style, the question still remains, how do you develop your own style? How do you make it so that what you write is uniquely yours? How do you grow your style? And there are several very basic and simple ways, but they're very important. First is read as much as you can. This is the number one piece of advice that authors give to people who want to start writing. It is read, read, read. Read different authors, read different genres, find out what you like about your favorite authors, and use some of those techniques. Do you like the way they describe people? Do you like the way they describe action? Do you like the way they describe the setting? Do you like the words that they use? Find out what they do that you enjoy and try to use that style into your own style, especially authors who are writing the same genre that you want to write, because there's going to be a lot of overlap. If you're writing a mystery story, read mystery authors, because that way you get an idea of how they set up that mystery. Find out which ones you like the most, find out which ones you don't feel so great about, and think why you like or don't like them, because that will be a key point in developing your own style. Next is experiment. Try different things out. See what works, see what doesn't. Don't be afraid to rewrite paragraphs and trying new things to see what works. Okay? Try out different word combinations. Focus on different parts of a scene. Try rewriting scenes that you enjoy from other stories. If you have a particular scene from a movie that you enjoy, try describing it in a paragraph. What do you focus on? What do you not focus on? What do you remember in your mind's eye? If you read it, do you still picture it the way it was in the film? Those are just some basic ideas of what you can do. And last, but arguably the most important, is practice, practice, practice. You should try to write every day if you can. If you can't, it's not the worst thing in the world, but even just a couple of minutes every day will help you be a better writer. It doesn't always have to be on the same topic. It could be writing in a journal. But the more you write, the more comfortable you will be with it, and the better off in the long run you will be, and the better writer you will be. So that about wraps up this video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. And just remember, when it comes to writing style, it's a very personal thing. There is no right or wrong way to go about it. It's just your way. So, however you decide to write, just write. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.